there's a specific kind of financial paralysis that doesn't get talked about enough. It's not the paralysis of someone who has never thought about investing. It's the paralysis of someone who has thought about it, maybe for years. And every time they get close to starting, a voice shows up that says, "You should have done this 10 years ago. The people who started at 22 are so far ahead of you now. The gap is so big that starting today feels almost pointless." And so you don't start. And another month goes by, and the voice gets a little louder next time because now it has one more month of evidence on its side. That voice is not being honest with you. And I don't mean that in the motivational poster way, I mean it in the mathematical way. The story that you are too late to invest, that the window has closed, that the people who started earlier have an unbeatable head start, that your best years for compounding are behind you, is built on a misunderstanding of how compounding actually distributes across time. And once I show you the real numbers, the too late narrative is going to collapse so completely that you'll be annoyed at yourself for believing it as long as you did. Here's the counterintuitive thing. The most powerful compounding years are not the early ones. They are the late ones. And the later you start, the sooner you get to the powerful years, which means starting at 40 is not half as good as starting at 20. It is different from starting at 20 in ways that are actually more interesting than you've been told. My name is Max, and I want to help you learn how to make your money work more for you in your life. This channel is about financial clarity that actually changes what you do. Not reassurance, but real understanding that makes the decision obvious. Subscribe if you want that. This is exactly what we do here, okay? Let's dismantle the belief that's keeping you frozen. The conventional understanding of compounding goes like this. The earlier you start, the better. Every year you delay costs you exponentially. The person who started at 22 has a head start so large that starting at 35 or 42 or 48 barely makes a meaningful difference. This is the narrative that personal finance content has been telling for decades, and it contains a truth. Early starts do have real mathematical advantages, but it tells that truth in a way that has an unintended and devastating consequence. It turns the concept of compound interest from a motivating force into a shaming one. Instead of, "Here's how powerful this is, start now," the message lands as, "If you haven't already started, you've already lost." And people who feel they've already lost don't start. They stay frozen. And frozen is the worst possible outcome. Here's the overlooked truth. Every single dollar you invest today, regardless of your age, regardless of what you didn't do in your 20s, regardless of how far behind you feel, will compound for as long as you let it. The math doesn't care about your age. It cares about time. And you have time. Maybe not the same time as someone who started at 22, but time you can use starting now that produces outcomes worth pursuing with everything you've got. Here's the analogy. Imagine two ships leaving a harbor. Ship A left 10 years ago and has been crossing the ocean ever since. Ship B is leaving today. The "you're too late" narrative says, Ship B can never catch Ship A, so why sail? But that's not the question. The question is, where does Ship B end up if it sails? The answer is, on the other side of the ocean, at a destination that does not exist if the ship stays in port. The gap between Ship A and Ship B is real, but it is not the point. The point is where Ship B is going, and it is going somewhere real, somewhere worth reaching, somewhere that only becomes possible the moment the ship leaves the harbor. Every day you stay frozen, thinking about what you didn't do before is another day. Ship B sits in port, not getting closer to anywhere. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the psychology of the too late feeling is not random. It has a very specific mechanism, and naming it is the first step to disabling it. Psychologists who study regret, including researchers Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, have documented a phenomenon called counterfactual thinking, the human tendency to evaluate current situations not against what's possible from here, but against an imagined alternative past. When you look at your empty investment account at 42 and feel the too late feeling, your brain is not actually comparing your current situation to your future potential. It's comparing your current situation to an imagined version of yourself who started at 25 and has had 17 years of compounding. That comparison is emotionally real, but strategically useless. The 25-year-old version of you who started investing does not exist. The 42-year-old version of you who starts today does. And the gap between those two versions, what the counterfactual comparison generates, is not information you can act on. It is emotional noise dressed up as financial analysis. The research on counterfactual thinking shows that it reliably produces two responses: regret, which is retrospective and unactionable, and paralysis, which is the behavioral consequence of a situation that feels already decided. Neither of these serves you. Neither gets money into an account. The way out of counterfactual thinking is not to pretend the gap doesn't exist. It's to deliberately redirect attention from the imagined past to the actual future, not I should have started at 25, but what does starting today actually produce? Those are different questions. Only one of them has an answer you can act on. Let's go directly to that answer, because the math on starting in your 40s is not the consolation prize you've been told it is. Let's say you are 42 years old. You have very little invested. You start today, $900 a month into a diversified index fund at 8% average annual return. Here's what that produces by the time you're 65. 23 years of $900 a month, compounding at 8%, produces approximately $700,000. Your total contributions, $248,400. The compounding added roughly $450,000 on top. The market generated nearly twice what you personally contributed. Now, you might look at that and compare it to someone who started at 25 and think, but they have so much more. And yes, mathematically, they do. The 25-year-old who runs the same $900 per month at 8% has approximately $1.9 million at 65. The gap is real, but here's the question that actually matters. Is $700,000 plus Social Security, plus whatever you've accumulated in a 401k over your career, a real, workable, dignified retirement? For most people, the honest answer is yes. That's not a consolation prize. That is a fundamentally different life than the one that results from staying frozen for another decade because the comparison felt discouraging. And here's the number that should genuinely move you. If you wait just 5 more years, if you start at 47 instead of 42, that $700,000 becomes approximately $430,000 at 65. The 5 years of delay didn't cost you $54,000 in contributions. It cost you $270,000 in final account value, because those 5 years would have been in the late curve phase of compounding, the phase where the math is most aggressive, where the account is largest, where each year's growth is measured in tens of thousands. Every year of delay is not just a year of missed contributions. It is a year of missed compounding on an increasingly large base. The cost of waiting does not decrease as you get older. It increases. That is not a threat. It is an opportunity, because it means the year you start, if you start this year, this month, this week, is the most valuable year available to you. Better than next year, much better than the year after. The best time to start was in your 20s. The second best time, mathematically and unambiguously, is today. Now let me talk about what the process of starting in your 40s actually builds in you, because this is the part I think matters most and gets almost no airtime in financial content aimed at late starters. The person who starts investing at 42 doesn't have the luxury of the slow, comfortable ramp up that a 25-year-old has. They can't afford to contribute $200 a month and feel like they've handled it. They have to be intentional, focused, and honest about their finances in a way that earlier starters often don't develop for years. They have to look directly at their spending and make real decisions, probably for the first time with genuine stakes. They have to build the habit fast and build it right, because the window is narrower and every month matters more. That urgency is not a disadvantage. It is a character accelerant. The late starter who builds a real investment habit in their 40s develops a financial seriousness and a clarity about money that many early starters never achieve precisely because the stakes never felt high enough to force the reckoning. The identity transformation from someone who is going to start investing eventually to someone who is actually doing it, to someone who has been doing it consistently for years, is available at 42 just as completely as at 22. Maybe more so, because the person at 42 knows what they're doing it for. They're not building an abstract future. They're building a very specific life, a very specific version of retirement, a very specific alternative to the financial vulnerability that the too late paralysis was producing. The stakes are clear. The motivation is real. The identity shift, when it comes, is durable. Here's how this plays out in concrete scenarios. Because the financial foundation built by a late starter changes the real world in ways that are worth seeing clearly. You're 47 and you've been investing for 5 years. Your portfolio is at $65,000. Your company announces a new initiative that includes early retirement packages for anyone over 50 who wants one. 5 years ago, no investment base, no financial cushion, complete income dependency. That announcement would have been irrelevant to you. The package couldn't have been seriously evaluated. Today, while $65,000 isn't enough to retire on yet, it's enough to see a path, enough to talk to a financial advisor with real numbers, enough to know that at your current contribution rate, the retirement math is moving in a real direction. The conversation with your employer is different because your position is different. You have options you didn't have 5 years ago. A market correction drops your portfolio by 22%. This is the moment that separates people who stay in from people who exit. At 42 with no investment experience, a 22% drop feels existential. At 49, 7 years into building, 7 years of watching the market recover from dips, 7 years of understanding at a felt level what temporary volatility actually means for a long-term investor, the same 22% drop is processed through a completely different framework. You don't just hold. You check your automated transfers still running. You might redirect a bonus into the dip. You understand that you're buying shares at a 28% discount and that the recovery will reprice them upward. The experience you've built transforms market risk from a threat into a navigable feature of the landscape. A consulting opportunity appears. 3 months of project work that pays $40,000 but requires leaving your salaried role temporarily and absorbing some income uncertainty. At 42, with no investment base and no financial cushion, this risk is probably too expensive. The income continuity requirement is too high. At 48, with a growing portfolio and an established emergency fund, the calculus is different. You have runway. You can absorb 3 months of uncertainty without it threatening your fundamental financial security. The opportunity becomes real. Rather than theoretical, you want to change careers entirely at 51. Not because you have to, because you want to. Because the work you've been doing no longer fits who you're becoming, and there's something else that matters more. This conversation is different when you have $180,000 in investments behind you than when you have $12,000. Not because the money solves every problem, but because it removes the financial panic from the decision making. You can think clearly. You can take your time. You can choose based on what you actually want, rather than what you can immediately afford to risk. And here's the career and negotiation dimension, which becomes, if anything, more powerful for the late starter. A 25-year-old with 3 years of investing and $30,000 in an account has some financial cushion. But they're still early in their career, still building professional credibility, still in the phase where saying the wrong thing or taking the wrong risk carries real career consequences. The 45-year-old who has been building their investment base for several years while accumulating 20 years of professional experience is a different kind of negotiator entirely. They know their market value. They have a professional reputation. They have the judgment that comes from 2 decades of doing hard things at work. And now they have, or are building, genuine walkaway power. The combination of professional credibility And financial optionality creates a negotiating position that is arguably stronger than at any other point in a career. The late investor who builds a real financial foundation in their 40s doesn't just change their retirement math. They change how every professional interaction plays out in what are likely the highest earning years of their life. Now, the warning I want to give you because it's specific to the experience of the late starter. The mistake late starters make, and it's understandable but it's expensive, is trying to recover the missed years through risk. If you start at 42 and feel behind, the temptation is to compensate with more aggressive investments, individual stocks instead of index funds, cryptocurrency positions sized too large for their actual role in a portfolio, alternative investments that promise faster returns because you feel like you need faster returns. The logic is, I don't have time for boring 8% returns. I need to catch up. Here's why this kills the math. A diversified index fund strategy at 8% average annual return, as I've already shown, produces $700,000 over 23 years. An aggressive, concentrated strategy that achieves 14% in good years, but loses 35% in bad years, which is a realistic profile for many speculative approaches, produces dramatically less because the losses compound against the base in a way that conservative losses don't. Losing 35% on a $300,000 account is a $105,000 loss that takes years of gains to recover. The catch-up through risk strategy reliably produces worse outcomes than the boring consistent strategy, for the specific mathematical reason that large losses are catastrophically more damaging than proportional gains are helpful. The late starter's advantage is not higher risk tolerance, it's urgency applied to the right behaviors. Higher contribution rates, lower fixed costs, consistent investment in boring diversified assets, rather than urgency applied to speculative risk. The turtle still wins. The turtle just needs to move a little faster than it did at 25, not abandon being a turtle. Here's where I close, and I want to say this as directly as I can. The too late feeling is not financial analysis. It is counterfactual grief dressed up as rational thinking. It is your brain comparing you to a version of yourself that doesn't exist and using that comparison to prevent you from becoming a version of yourself that could. And every day it works, every day it keeps you frozen, it is not protecting you from a bad outcome. It is guaranteeing one. You are not too late. The math does not support that conclusion. $900 a month, starting today at 42, produces $700,000 by 65. Starting at 47 produces $430,000. Starting at 52 produces $240,000. Every one of those is a real destination, a real retirement, a real life that doesn't exist if the ship stays in port. The only thing that makes you too late is waiting until the math actually closes. And it hasn't. Not yet, not today. Ship B is leaving the harbor. The ocean is real, the other side is waiting. Get on the ship.